Magellan's strange encounter with the 10-foot giants of Patagonia. In 1520, Ferdinand Magellan took time out of his busy schedule of sailing around the world to stop in what is now Patagonia, where he found a naked giant dancing and singing on the shore. Magellan ordered one of his men to make contact. The unwitting emissary's no doubt hilarious reaction to this sadly has been lost to history, but to be sure to reciprocate the dancing and singing to demonstrate friendship. And it worked. The man was able to lead the giant to a small island offshore where the great captain waited. Describing the scene was a scholar along for the journey, Antonio Pigafetta, who kept a diary of the journey and was later turned into a book, Magellan's Voyage, a narrative account of the first circumnavigation. When he was before us, he began to marvel and to be afraid, and he raised one finger upward, believing that we came from heaven. And he was so tall that the tallest of us only came up to his waist, and he had a big booming voice. The illustration above proves that Patagonia was once inhabited by giants that positively dwarfed the heavenly Europeans that would come to conquer them. All right, maybe this is not airtight evidence, but it could well be that the people Magellan encountered, the Tehuelche, were indeed enormous, and that therefore this myth has some grounding in reality. And our trusty explorer would have be damned if he was not going to try to bring back evidence in pretty much the most obnoxious way you could imagine. On the small island, Magellan had his men give the giant food and drink, then made the mistake of showing him a mirror, wherein the giant, seeing himself, was greatly terrified, wrote Pigafetta, leaping back so that he threw 4 of our men to the ground. But once things had calmed down, the explorers proceeded to make contact with the rest of the tribe, hunting them with and even building a house to store their provisions while on shore. After several weeks with the tribe, Magellan hit upon a scheme. He'd kidnap 2 of them and take them back to Spain to prove he had discovered giants. But this was by a cunning trick, for otherwise the giants would have troubled some of our men. Magellan gave them all manners of metal goods to fool around with, mirrors, scissors, bells, so they wouldn't mind at all when he slapped cuffs and chains on their legs. Whereas these giants took great pleasure in seeing these fetters and did not know where they had to be put, and they were grieved that they could not take them with their hands because their mitts already were full of other trinkets. Magellan, though, lost his evidence during the long haul back to Spain. The giants did not survive, but what Magellan and Pigafetta did bring back was the tale and the new name of the land of the giants, Patagonia, the etymology of which is still unclear. Some have argued it means land of the big feet, from pata, Spanish for foot. More likely, though, Magellan picked up the name from a popular novel at the time, Magellan, which featured a race of wild people called the Patagonians. But leave it to the Brits to throw cold water on the whole thing. Sir Francis Drake later made contact with the same Patagonians, as summarized by his nephew in The World Encompassed from 1628, a smackdown worth quoting at length. Magellan was not altogether deceived in naming these giants, for they generally differ from the common sort of man, both in stature, bigness, and strength of body, as also in the hideousness of their voices. But they are nothing so monstrous and giant-like as they were represented, there being some Englishmen as tall as the highest we could see. But pre-adventure the Spaniards did not think that ever an Englishman could come hither to reprove them, and therefore might presume the more boldly to lie. You may have noticed by now that most illustrations of the Patagonian giants involve Europeans handing them things. It was the map above that likely influenced them, including the drawing of Commodore John Byron conversing with a Patagonian woman. And that, as scholars put it, is a sick burn. It's also entirely right, according to William Sturtevant in his essay Patagonian Giants and Baroness Hyde de Neuville's Iroquois drawings. The Tehuelche were just a particularly statuesque people. While subsequent voyages after Magellan measured the Patagonians up to 10 feet tall, others put them more in the 6-foot range. Popular interest in Patagonian giants waned as scientific reports began to appear, writes Sturtevant. Some 19th century estimates or measurements of individuals were still high, upwards of 7 feet, but better samples of Tehuelche men brought them down to about 6 feet tall, perfectly reasonable for a human being, but entirely unimpressive for a giant. If we accept the lowest and the least well documented of these means based on modern measurements of male series, he adds, the Tehuelche are nevertheless among the tallest populations known anywhere in the world. By contrast, male Europeans like Magellan in the 16th through 18th centuries would have measured in the low 5-foot range. Their imaginations, though, apparently outgrew their small stature. But why then do human beings vary so much in their height? There is, of course, a factor of nutrition, but a much more subtle influence is at work here. The tallest man who ever lived, Robert Wadlow, with his father who appears grumpy, probably because of all the money he had to spend on his son's giant clothes. Animals, including humans, have a tendency to grow taller in cold climates and smaller in warm ones. This is known as Bergmann's rule. With a big body, you lose heat less quickly and are therefore better adapted to survive freezing temperatures. So it's no accident that the world's biggest terrestrial predator, the polar bear, takes to the far north, while tropical creatures which can shed heat quicker are better adapted to sweltering jungles. And over evolutionary time, environments can exert the same pressure on human beings. Thus would the natives of frigid Patagonia do well to grow taller than their European counterparts. There's also the possibility that the Tehuelche man who Magellan and his crew claimed they saw was so tall they only reached his waist, suffering from a disorder of the pituitary gland. This releases runaway levels of human growth hormone, as it did in the tallest man in recorded history, 8'11" Robert Wadlow. And indeed, the photograph shows Robert, his 5'11" father, a man far taller than average male, in the 1500s, coming up to his son's waist. The human body, though, is simply not meant to grow to such heights. Pituitary giants typically have much shorter lifespans than the average human because their hearts, even though proportionally large, struggle to pump blood through their bodies. Wadlow himself had little sensation in his feet, eventually dying at just 22 from an infected blister that he never felt forming. So even if it were possible to have an entire race of such giants, it would be a very unhealthy population indeed. Thus, the giants of Patagonia remain nothing more than the products of some sailors' imaginations and maybe a little bit of scurvy. Never hurts to blame scurvy. Now, this is on Collective Spark by Matt Simon from Wired. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.